You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
A source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the province.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech.
With your host, Omar M. Khatib.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Now, this one is focused more on the investment side, but a really unique guest in the sense that she's somebody who was a founder and CEO and then transitioned into the investment world. So today we have Dr. Juliet Singh, who's coming up to us from DeBere Partners. Give you a little bit of background on her. You know, she started out by studying endocrinology and then started her career with Genentech. She joined Baxter Healthcare and led global regulatory approval for R-Factor 8, which was one of the first biotech products on the market. She then joined Allergan and led the regulatory approval for rather small drug. You may have heard of it called Botox, right? So really, really big products, really big blockbuster products there. She was then the corporate officer with Collateral Therapeutics, which was acquired by Sharing AG before becoming a CEO and founder of a pharmaceutical company, which she took public. She has global access to investors, a lot of deal flow, and serves on several boards. She and I met at one of my favorite events in the MedTech investor world, which is LSI at beautiful Dana Point. We had a wonderful evening. She actually got seated with me and my wife at dinner. And so since then, I've been asking her to come on the show to talk about her experience as a CEO and founder, but also topics such as certain investments that DeBere looks into, as well as how do you pick board members. So Juliet, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. I'm just in the Hamptons for the summer.
Not a bad place to be, right?
Yes, it's nice.
So maybe we can start out with a little bit of your background in terms of what was it like for you when you were a CEO and founder of that pharmaceutical company that you took public. Maybe you can share a little bit of background on that and things that you learned.
Okay. I think just having come from my medical background and then starting from the ground up in corporate world, biotech, pharmaceutical, being hands-on and dealing with information in all areas, manufacturing, preclinical, clinical, regulatory was my space in the early pharmaceutical biotech world. So you have to deal with all aspects of drug development and getting it through FDA approval processes and approved globally. So having had that background and experience and knowledge was very useful in starting my pharmaceutical company that was focused in a topical pain medication. I think, during my career, I was always one of the younger females in charge of maybe older gentlemen that during my time are more used to perhaps the housewife environment. So those dynamics were challenging. And at the time, over 10 years ago, when I started the company, I was one of the few female founders at the time in the industry. And I think now you have a lot of young ladies that are doing startups because everyone in the world, basically in every sector, is doing a startup. But I think the challenges for me were perhaps also just being a younger female founder. I think having older people report into me perhaps ultimately became a bit of a challenge. I think having good, loyal, hardworking people with good backgrounds in the industry is important. And then the other major important area is just the board, selecting board members that will actually contribute and pitch in, whether they'll help bring in more investments or help on marketing or other manufacturing or other strategies is really important, because just to have board members that sit on a board and ask question after question and perhaps not knowing the fine details of what it takes to get a drug to the market is more of, you know, waste of time and energy. So that is another area I would focus on, is try to hire a good board that's going to be loyal and actually contributing to help you rather than perhaps not help.
That makes sense. And before I want to dig into that a little bit, but I'm just curious. You had a fantastic career, and you sort of joined the biotech pharma world in quite an exciting time, especially like with with working on Botox and Allergan. Why did you decide to become a founder CEO?
I think I've always been career driven. So I've always been ambitious, and I think having that background was very useful and beneficial. So you know all components of the industry. For example, today I see a lot of people, CEOs, heading up companies in med device, pharma, bio space that perhaps are coming out of high tech industry or real estate. Well, this is a tough industry. It is very important you have hands on experience, knowledge. And from my experience, also just straight academic or straight physician people without corporate background, it's a bit challenging for them as well. It's almost like you have to go through the experience and working in those corporate environments to know how to go about doing certain things, what the requirements are, what it takes to drive a drug through. And it is never a walk in the park. Every day is some sort of challenge and hurdle you have to overcome, whether it could be a clinical issue or a manufacturing issue. It just never is a quiet moment. So I know I've been asked, once you've raised your funding, is that then an easy path forward? Well, no, fundraising never really stops. And then the other challenges that you have to deal with day to day continue.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think there's this misconception that as a founder, because the thing that most founders are against the wall about usually is like funding, but funding doesn't really solve problems. I think it helps accelerate your ability to solve them, but it doesn't. It's not going to make things easier. Being a female founder during those times, you mentioned a lot of difficulty, whether it was having older people report to you or, more importantly, being in a male-dominated field. What's your advice to young female professionals who are listening to this now, who are considering, like, let's say, starting a medtech company or a biotech company? What were some things that you learned that kind of made you the leader you are today?
Right. First of all, I don't want to, it's challenging even in terms of women supporting women. So it's just not perhaps
Really?
men in general. And I must say, some of my best colleagues and friends actually are gentlemen. But the other issue ladies encounter, and I'm just speaking from my experience, is where ladies don't necessarily support other ladies as well, whether it's in business or personal arena. So I think that's an area that does need a lot of help and improvement also. But I think for younger female founders, and I do ask younger female founders how it is in the work environment in terms of working with gentlemen or ladies, and they still think it's challenging. But I think their perspective may be a bit different than when I was coming through the corporate world, which is 10 plus years ago. In today's world, I think there's a lot more females working and in higher level positions, but funding for female led companies is very low. It's probably less than 5% still in terms of getting actual funding, which you need to drive your programs forward. So that in general, and I think there's stats out there, it's still challenging for female founders to get funding. And then I would say try to do your best to hire loyal, good, hardworking people initially. And then that doesn't guarantee the dynamics will remain that way as maybe one makes progress and becomes successful. But I think it's very important to hire very experienced, knowledgeable people, especially in these pharma, biotech industries that are hardworking and going to be honest and loyal.
No, that makes sense. You know, I think it's what's fascinating is that, like, you know, you have experience as an operator within a large corporation, then being a CEO, founder, and of course taking a company public. And so as an investor, I think you have this very unique and rare skill set where you work both within like large strategics and also in a smaller company. You know, what kind of took you over to DeBere, and like what kind of you know, offices DeBere, what kind of investments do you guys make?
Right. So I'm actually I'm based in Silicon Valley for the last few years. And I'm also affiliated with venture groups out there that I help do diligence for med device, pharma, bio deals. And then there's another venture group, cancer-based, I'm involved with, that focuses only on cancer-based ventures. And then another one, Alumni Ventures, which is throughout the U.S., smaller size investments in med device, pharma, bio, AI-based ventures. But Family Office Circle, London-based, is more flexible in terms of the amount of funding. So I do evaluate the deals. I'm more flexible in terms of personally looking at early stage to later stage med device, pharma, bio. But then I'm tough, like I will dig in quickly. And if a particular venture is not unique or revolutionary, with the appropriate CEO and team and some data that you can analyze, patent protection and all that, then I will pass quickly. So I will give an opportunity to look at a venture, but quickly see if it meets those key parameters and then pass.
Have you ever made an investment where one of those parameters wasn't exactly there for you, but the other two were so strong you said, hey, we can kind of make this work?
I mean, the technology has to be there, and it being a unique product opportunity where it's not another fifth, sixth venture similar out there in the space. So CEO, team, the market potential opportunity, those are hard ones that I probably haven't overlooked.
That makes sense. It's funny because you know, on DeBere's website, like when under your services tab, I don't know if you guys purposely did this, but you essentially have a picture of a ship in the ocean. So kind of blue oceans is what you're talking about. You know, the thing about finding like very revolutionary products that are going into a blue ocean, new market, right?
Right.
Is that it requires quite a lot of funding, and they're even more riskier. How do you look at de-risking those kind of products where you say it's a revolutionary product, first of its kind, and et cetera? But of course, a lot of times the market isn't even developed for that. How do you look at de-risking those kind of deals?
Right. Again, team, right. The leadership is very important, experienced. So they know what to look out for and help build the right structure and data moving forward. But then I must say, like all these industries, it's a bit of luck as well, because that data has to work and has to be there. And even if you have someone like Einstein, CEO, heading the venture, it if that data doesn't work and you cannot get appropriate data out of animal studies or human clinical trials, then it will not succeed. And that's hard for anyone really to predict until you get into the animal studies and then try to move beyond that, which is risky as well. Get through the clinical data. So the hurdles are very high. And data is very important, that even for myself, I can do the best diligence, and down the road, say further down in clinical studies, the program may not make it out of phase 2 studies. So that's a tough one for, I think, anyone to predict and try to overcome, because you can't change the data. But I think and I think the success rate in our pharma bio industry for getting all the way through is less than 10%. So it's a very low probability.
Yeah, absolutely. On the med device side, there's a little bit more flexibility to be, I would say, experimental, in the sense that, you can have a device with like a decent amount of clinical studies on it, but as long as they get through the FDA and put it in the hands of users, a lot of things can happen. However, on the biopharma side, the science has to work, right? But the thing that we see is that to get through these different phases, it requires so much money. And so at some point, it's really important on the strategics to either fund or acquire these. Is that the reason why, at least on the bio and pharma side, you're so heavy on the data and the science behind it? Is because there, to get to commercialization, it's usually rare, and usually you need like a strategic to come and acquire a technology?
Right. Well, data from my point of view, even to get it through, if you take it all the way through FDA approval and other global authority approvals, you need the data. Because if you don't have data, you can't get it all the way through the finish line to make your submission for review. But I'm even, for myself, early on, I passed on some ventures because I thought those pharma bio companies would not make it out of preclinical phase. And they just happened to be in a sector that was very popular, perhaps at the time. So they had big acquisitions in the billions of dollars. But then they failed because they couldn't make it through pre-clin into clinical studies. So there are some ventures that are just fortunate where they get acquired by big pharma bio, but that doesn't guarantee success, because the data ultimately still has to be successful all the way through.
How, again, because you are a founder, CEO, and now investor, what's your advice to some of the, biotech and pharma founders in terms of the importance of picking the right researchers?
Right. Yes. The right researchers that, hopefully have a background specifically in the space that you're trying to do drug discovery or development in, R&D. But also the other very important factor is the medical clinical head, because they are the ones that will be in charge of designing the clinical studies. And those studies do require that you have knowledge and experience and know what to look out for in terms of what type of patients to include, which ones to exclude, and on and on. There's a whole, long list of things when you put a clinical protocol together. That to me is very important as well, because if they miss one aspect and that causes your clinical trial to not be accepted and the data to be rejected, then that's a big failure. That perhaps if you had a different medical person in charge more knowledgeable, that could have designed the trial appropriately, make it through, then you can't backtrack and go back. So all these people actually, especially in startup world, everyone has to contribute. It's not a walk in the park. They all should be hands-on, hardworking, um, from CEO level to your head of manufacturing, and whether you hire, a external contract organization, make sure they're knowledgeable and have experience in this space and will follow up properly, to your clinical head, to your tox animal study people head. All of them should be knowledgeable, because any of those areas, if they fail to make the right decisions and design or so on, then it's going to lead to failure for the whole program and company.
Of course, that makes it makes a lot of sense. Well, on the side of picking board members, I feel like there's a bit of art and science to it. Some people think that, oh, I should just get the biggest names with the most money and put them on my board, and that's usually not the best approach. So there is an art to assembling a board. How do you think about it in terms of the first board members you pick? Why do you pick those ones? And what advice do you have for founders in terms of mistakes you often see?
Okay, so as far as the board selection, I personally think you should select board members that are going to contribute actively. So whether it's for fundraising, because fundraising really never ends until perhaps you get acquired and or get your FDA approval or global approvals and start selling, marketing the product. So active board members that hopefully are going to be loyal and knowledgeable. So say, for example, there's a failure in the animal data. They should recognize that that's perhaps common and try to work around that to resolve the issue rather than being counterproductive by launching attacks. Like, there should be support for the CEO, especially as well, because the CEO job is a lonely job and it's hard. So it's good to have allies with you that will help you and ones that you can discuss and walk through issues with. And as far as big names, I do know of companies that hire people that could be coming out of, they could be ex-FDA or other people that are well known, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be successful either. And hopefully they're contributing to help move the company forward. So I'm very much into people that have connections that are going to actively utilize those, whether it's clinical, manufacturing, marketing, any of those areas, but be active, loyal, supportive board members.
How do you figure out if a board member is going to be supportive and loyal?
That's hard, actually, because, I mean, you think because nobody is taking on a hire thinking they're going to be disloyal. So you may walk into it thinking this person you may have known for years will be a good ally, but then, and that's just for all people, not just men or women in general. I think people can encounter these situations where you think you hired someone, brought them on to be a good ally, good support system, and over the years those dynamics change. So there's no guarantee aside from doing your best from your knowledge space and diligence to select these people, whether they're your direct on the company people or board members.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And sometimes it's sort of tricky. You know, board members don't necessarily get have LinkedIn recommendations for you to go and read, right?
Right. It is. It's like any, I guess, relationship, right? In working environment or so on, where those dynamics, they're not guaranteed to last. So it is a tough one because
How
there
do
are a lot of issues people have with each other in the corporate world or elsewhere.
hmm How do you look at, let's say, the role of somebody like who sits as a board observer? Do you ever feel that the board observer can play like a significant role to the CEO, or not so much?
I mean, I always, if I'm involved, I will make my honest comments or recommend strategies or thoughts that I have. So I think it depends on um, the situation. But I always, if I'm joining something, it's to make an active contribution to try to help the venture. And even when I see ventures I'm not interested in, I will just give them advice in terms of how to move forward or just my recommendations or issues that I see in terms of even improving their management presentation. That's a big issue I see with a lot of these presentations. There's a lot of repetition. The key information is missing, which could be the data. I'm very data driven. If you have data, it should be presented in a concise summary manner. And I really do not like if a CEO tells me to go read a publication because we don't have that time. That is the job of the CEO to put together a proper, concise, well put together presentation that includes data if they have that data.
No, I completely agree. And I look at pitch decks all the time. And a lot of times, aside from the appropriate data, which again should be summarized and very easy to just, get the point of, the story of the company as to like what's the problem we're solving and why is that important is often missing.
Exactly. They just go on with their potential revenue stream and that's not even known. If you're in pre-clin, you don't even know if you're going to make it over to that point. But it's like focus on what's your strategy? What's your regulatory approval path? What kind of data do you need? And what is your current database? And
Absolutely.
your patent position, at least for these type of ventures.
Yeah, I completely agree. And sometimes I think too much time is spent. Would you agree? Do you feel sometimes that CEOs and founders spend too much time on the make believe part of like, this is what our total addressable market is, and this is what our revenue, versus actually focusing on the problem they solve, the patents and data?
I agree. And those are sometimes overinflated. And the other issue I encounter um, is when they try to do an analysis of the competitor landscape. I like to have a fair analysis and don't miss a particular company that I will know of and I have to mention it to them. Then you're going to lose a bit of trust. I like them to be honest and present what is your competitor landscape look like out there globally, because I don't want to have to go do that search. I was just on a call with a lady, actually, CEO founder, who's very knowledgeable. And I asked her this question, and she has a slide already put together on it. So she sent it right away. So that is good follow up. And the other thing I think is if I ask a question and the CEO does not know the answer, then don't try to just create an answer, but just state that you're going to research that and then get back to me. Like, just honesty is very important. And then not getting defensive if you come back, ask challenging questions, or push back on the market or some other factor. Like, one should not get defensive, but try to address the issue in a proper professional manner.
No, I completely agree. And I think, again, since there's so many unknowns early on with the startup, I think the way you present information, how honest you are about it, all these things really make the impression whether somebody should invest in you or not. We have for our show, we do have, I'm starting to learn a lot of family offices who, and private investors who come from different industries, oftentimes like real estate and construction. So non-medical people who are now having an interest in like medtech and bio and pharma, who listen to the show and everything. What advice do you have for those family officers and investors in terms of getting into the industry? Are there certain events, you and I met at LSI, which I love, but I wonder if there's other events that you recommend those family offices and investors check out, so that way they start learning more about the space and make their best investments.
Right. For me, again, it's very important if you're part of a family office, because I do know such situations coming out of tech world or real estate. If you want to get into these investment opportunities that are very difficult, it is very important to have somebody with background experience do the diligence of these ventures, whether it's a tech venture you want to go after. Real estate, I feel we're all more or less, perhaps we could handle.
Yeah.
Tech, pharma, bio world, any of those sectors, you should have someone with deep experience and not just in general sort of surface experience. As then if you decide to make these investment opportunities based on not having the appropriate diligence done by the appropriate people in tough sectors, then you can't blame anyone else, because that's, if you want to get into these areas, then you're going to have the proper people to do the diligence. As far as different family office circles, conferences, meetings, I think they vary. There's, in family office world, I know for myself, there's not a lot of medical related pharma, bio, med device people. A lot of them are real estate or perhaps more tech based. So I think conferences, I think you just select and see who you meet that may be perhaps useful or a good connection to make.
What are some of the conferences you like to attend yourself?
So I mix it around. I go to a lot of more venture capital focused in the medical space for myself personally. And for family office based conferences, I was just actually at one 2 weeks ago in the Hamptons, which I was impressed. They did a good job in terms of having a good mix of people there. But sometimes that's not always the case for me. It may be too real estate heavy for me or tech, but you still meet good people, but it's not going to be for business purposes.
Got it. That makes sense. And I think it's important also for, some of these family offices and funds where they have a younger member who is going to start making investments and they decide, hey, I really want to get into medtech and bio. You need help diligencing these deals. And so I think it's important for them to like connect with somebody like you and your firm. So that way they have that help. By the way, for those who are listening who are interested, you can check out the website, DeBerePartners.com. So it's D as in dog, EBERE, partners.com. Juliet, as we kind of wrap up, and again, thank you so much for coming on the show and spending some time with us. I'm wondering just these days, as an investor, aside from the conferences you attend and everything, are there any books or podcasts or any resources that you often recommend to other investors that you like?
I actually don't, because I focus on emails and looking through information on these presentations. So I don't actually read that much anymore, which may not be a great thing. And then social media, I'm not really a social media type of person. I'm probably more private. So I probably don't engage in too much of that. I think you're one of the few podcasts. I did one prior to you during the time frame we met, so I don't even really do podcasts.
Well,
either.
I'm honored that you liked me enough to come on the show. So I really appreciate that. So, well, Juliet, thank you so much for coming on the show. I hope to have you back as we, sort of ramp up our audience as more investors and family offices learn about the space. For those who are listening, Juliet does have a LinkedIn, so if you want to give her a follow there, but again, not that active, which is okay. But if you want to learn more, you can go to DeBerePartners.com. Is there any other website that you're affiliated with?
Or they could actually just reach out to me directly on my email, because if it's just general question or other wanting more information, it could be to my email, which is Juliet, Juliet @global, GLOBAL, strategic, STRATEGIC, medical.com. That might be the best, because that way, if it's a specific inquiry, I just filter. I use that email more for board related roles that are outside of perhaps investment type of opportunities.
Perfect. And we really appreciate you sharing that, so that way they can reach out. So if you are interested in reaching out, just reach out to Juliet directly. So with that being said, I'm your host, Omar Khatib. If you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. We have a lot of great content coming out. Give us 5 stars and write a review, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.